Welcome to Fort Fetterman State Historic Site on the Bozeman Trail. The fort was named after Captain William J. Fetterman, who had been killed in December 1866 in a famous fight with Lakota, Arapaho, and Cheyenne warriors near Fort Phil Kearny, farther north on the Bozeman Trail. In that fight, Fetterman and a detachment of 80 men were annihilated in a clever and well-rehearsed ambush. That fight was an event in Red Cloud's War, which ended in 1868 with the signing of the Treaty of Laramie. Fort Phil Kearny, along with Forts C.F. Smith and Reno, were abandoned, and the Bozeman Trail was effectively closed. Fort Fetterman was established in July 1867 along the Bozeman Trail just south of the North Platte River, near where the city of Douglas would be started in 1886. Being south of the river, Fort Fetterman was excluded from the provisions of the Treaty of Laramie. Originally meant to protect travelers on the Bozeman Trail, the fort became a supply and assembly point for Army operations against Plains Indians in the mid-1870s. Here is an aerial view of the historic site. I have indicated some current features of the site. The visitor center is in a building that used to be officers' quarters. Here is a pencil sketch of what the fort looked like in 1880. Note particularly where the Bozeman Trail passes through the north end of the fort. The location of the fort was bleak, and was considered a hardship post by troops. Desertions were frequent, supplies inadequate, and water from the river inconvenient to service the fort. Not much is left of the fort today. Only 2 buildings remain. Both buildings contain exhibits. The grounds are well marked with explanatory plaques noting locations of former buildings. Here's the visitor center along with public restrooms. These are maps taken from the Historic Sites brochure. I will start at the visitor center, walk up the right side of the parade grounds to a gazebo overlooking the North Platte River, and then back down the left side of the fort. An example of an explanatory plaque. This one is close to the visitor center. Pause the video as you go along to be able to read all the information on these plaques. Here is a nice map of the historic site on a plaque outside the visitor center. This is a diorama of the fort. I circled the visitor center and the ordnance building. This is a Mcclellan cavalry saddle. The museum had a variety of exhibits. This shows what an officer's quarters looked like. This is the ordnance building. Ordnance refers to weapons, especially artillery. Powder and ammunition were stored in the powder magazine nearby. This is a small sign on the inside wall of the ordnance building. Notes that the building was built in 1887. It says that the building was built using what is called rammed earth construction. Clay mud mixed with straw were formed into blocks 2 feet square and 6 feet long. I enlarged the photograph above the sign. You can clearly see the method of constructing the walls. Here the constructors left exposed a small section of a wall. After the walls were made of the blocks were coated with cement. This photo shows some of the exhibits. Fetterman City refers to the town that sprang up from converting the fort, abandoned by the military in 1882, to civilian usage. These exhibits described sites around Douglas and the fort and displayed some artifacts found, mostly bottles. This display described types of wagons used by the military. And here is a better view of some of the wagons. Locals took advantage of the abandoned fort and developed a small town on the site called Fetterman City. The town thrived as a social center and supply point for area ranchers and cattlemen. The novelist Owen Wister incorporated the town into his novel The Virginian, widely regarded as the first true Western, as the town of Drybone, In 1886, the town of Douglas was established to the southeast on the railroad, and that eventually killed Fetterman City. This shelter was named in memory of a well-regarded rancher in the area, Herman Werner. This is the site of the powder magazine. Here are two views of the Ordnance Building and the Visitor Center. Note again the bleakness of the surrounding countryside. This spot was the location of the guardhouse. The poles had metal tubes in the tops that you could look through and pick out sites of some key features of the fort. The view site on the left post points to where the telegraph line from Fort Laramie was located. The right post points to a road that was used to transport supplies to the fort overland from the town of Rock Creek well to the south. The plaque in the photo was entitled Communications. Here is the entire communications plaque. This is the site of the post headquarters. Site of the post hospital. The plaque at the site of the post hospital. The site of the Bachelor officers' quarters. The plaque at the site discussed the Fetterman Hotel that was developed from those quarters. Here are some views of the parade ground. This view is looking south. This view is looking north. Note the gazebo way in the distance. The river is behind it. That's my water bottle sitting on the gravel path by the explanatory sign. It was a hot day, June, on the high plains. These posts and plaque describe the stables, corrals, and repair shops for the fort. This is a view of the North Platte River from the same spot. The Bozeman Trail passed through Fort Fetterman near its northern end, as you saw in the pencil drawing of the fort earlier in the video. This plaque discussed the trail. This stone marker sits where the trail ran down off the plateau of the fort and wound its way northwest. Another view of where the Bozeman Trail went. The site of storehouses. The site of the fort's water cistern. This is what remains of the water cistern. Water was brought up from the river. The fort itself had no wells. That is Highway 93 in the background. Here's the gazebo I mentioned earlier. It has a pleasant view of the North Platte River forward and a panoramic view of the fort looking back. This plaque discusses the water supply at the fort. The post cites toward where a pump house was established in the later years of the fort to pump water up to the water cistern. A close-up of the plaque telling about the water supply. The sighting post on the left points to the probable site of a former ferry across the North Platte River. The post on the right points to the location of the notorious saloon and brothel that sprang up north of the fort to service soldiers and cowboys. Brothels were referred to as hog ranches. This plaque discusses the local brothel. This is an historical highway marker about a mile north of the fort. This is a sketch of the hog house posted on a wall in the Ordnance Building. This post points to the location of the camp of General George Crook at the start of his 1876 campaign against Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho Indians. His was one of 3 columns that were supposed to converge on the camps of the Indians. The other 2 columns were led by Lieutenant Colonel George Custer and General John Gibbon, all under the overall command of General Alfred Terry. But Crook was driven back to Fort Fetterman in the Battle of Rosebud Creek. Custer, not waiting for the assistance of Crook, Gibbon, or Terry, met his fate on the Little Bighorn. The view of the North Platte River was very pleasant. The gazebo was well situated. Here's a look back toward the fort, looking south. This is the site of infantry barracks. This plaque talks about the barracks. This plaque talks about the rations of the soldiers. This is the site of the post-traders establishment. They were called sutlers. This plaque talks about the functions of the sutlers. And this is the undercarriage of a military wagon.